Welcome to the Leadernomics Show. I'm here in Bangalore and we are with Firstsource and I'm with the CEO, Rajesh Subramaniam. Welcome to the show and thanks for giving us the opportunity to have this conversation.
My pleasure.
You know, you've got such an interesting background, right? With a couple of big companies and then building Firstsource, growing it, taking a short sabbatical, so to say, coming back to turn it around again and really scaling Firstsource across the world. Tell us a bit about yourselves. I mean, where did you start? How did you begin? Tell us a little bit of the man behind Rajesh.
Just an interesting anecdote. When I joined Firstsource, it was way back in 2001. I was actually the first employee of the company. I used to work with the parent, ICICI. In those days, Firstsource was called ICICI OneSource Limited. We set up this business to leverage the global capabilities of ICICI Bank. ICICI Bank was a truly universal bank.
Yep.
To leverage its domain in a broad spectrum of financial services, not just banking, but insurance, asset management, and create a very viable and valuable third-party business process outsourcing business. So that was the initial charter.
Right.
So it was also the entry vehicle for the founding CEO, who was an old ICICI alumni, and he and I basically started this company way back in 2001, December.
And how, I mean, getting that opportunity to start this company, talk us through a little bit of your background with Walden and a few other.
Sure.
How did you get into this space in the first place?
So I think before joining ICICI, I was a venture capitalist. I used to be a venture capitalist working with a gentleman called Bill Melton, and prior to that, all my work experience was in financial services advisory or in fund management. So in a nutshell, no real operating experience. It was more advisory and more. Nothing that saw me get my hands dirty.
Right. And a very interesting, unique BPO sort of business.
Absolutely. Right? And then, all of us go through our own, inflection points in life.
Yeah, yes.
So for me, that inflection point was, getting to do something a lot more meaningful and deeper from an operating side, which is, try and help create a business. And the opportunity with ICICI presented itself. If you recollect, way back in 2000, 2001 was the early days of the BPO industry in India. It was a sunrise industry.
Towards the late 90s and early 2000s.
Absolutely. High growth, attracting some of the finest minds in the industry. And, it basically what today is a thriving, robust business, the seeds of which were set up in way back in 99, 2000 by companies like ICICI, GE, Amex, a lot of today all the successful entrepreneurs who have created have come from this ecosystem.
Absolutely, with Genpact and all. I mean, you see Tiger.
Absolutely. So yes, I was fortunate enough to be in a sunrise industry. Part design, part accident. Sometimes you can't be focused to say that this is an industry.
There's some divine intervention.
Yeah, you just happen to be in the right place at the right time, it was fun scaling the business. So talk us through that process a bit, because that's, I guess post when you look back 10, 15 years and you look at that moment, you kind of forget that actually there were a lot of challenges, I'm sure there were a lot of issues and a lot of stressful moments that helped shape who you are today anyway. What were some of these things? What were some of the early challenges and how did you overcome them? Yeah, so I think the early challenges was, defining the opportunity, because the opportunity was so wide. You can't take a bet on everything. You have to
really scope it down.
You have to scope it down and you have to focus on saying that I'm going to take a bet on these two vectors of the entire landscape, and I'm going to take this through and create the value that I believe is rightfully due to the shareholders who have backed the company. So first was creating an environment of debates and strategy formulation which helped us narrow down on where we believe the strategy should take us, leveraging the reasons why ICICI set it up.
Yes.
Because it was to create a very valuable business, leveraging their core capabilities, which was around the what we today call the BFSI spectrum, which is banking, financial services, and insurance. So forming strategies around how do we create a business to these big banks in the US, insurance companies in the UK, and how do we create a viable franchise for them out of India. And in those days, people came to India for cost arbitrage. It wasn't value, it was cost. The cost at which you could do business in India was far cheaper. The value arguments happened subsequently because once the industry started maturing,
and you started to see cost escalating.
You see cost escalating, but you see the value. The value curve also was significantly higher. So it could absorb the inflation of costs very easily because the end outcome to the clients were far superior than what they earlier expected, even what we expected. Because the workforce that we created was so intelligent. And they could deliver outcomes which were far superior to what the clients would experience themselves in the markets they were operating in.
You design, a clear value proposition and a clear market segmentation, a product market fit, and then comes the hard part, the execution piece, right?
God is in execution.
Absolutely, right. So what were some of the nitty-gritties in the execution pieces that potentially may have derailed you, but you managed to overcome them and execute?
I think in the early days, we made so many mistakes. And the good thing in life is once you know there is a problem, you can fix it. And you learn from mistakes. And so the evolution of making mistakes, correcting mistakes, making new mistakes, correcting new mistakes, I think that whole learning process helped us, create a very, very solid company. The advantage of making these mistakes was that we had a very solid backup, because sometimes you make mistakes, suddenly you run out of capital. But when you have the capital backing, it's able to forgive the mistakes that you make, but the learnings from the mistakes is crucial in terms of how you pull forward. And honestly, that's exactly what I mean. We took several bets. Some of it worked, some of it didn't work. But fundamentally, we stayed the course of executing on a certain strategy. And what we did was we were more demand side predicated. We were more focused on what is the solution required to solve a problem today. We weren't focused on how many people can we hire and train and scale. It doesn't matter. Because if you don't know what you're solving for, you can burn through capital very quickly in creating a supply side, and we see that a lot. So I think we had the strappings of a core team that stayed together in the initial years. That the chemistry of the first 10 founders in the business was extremely critical in setting up the foundation for the company to be successful.
We're going to take a quick short break. We'll be right back here on the Leronomics Show with Rajesh Subramaniam. Welcome back to the Leronomics Show. We are talking to Firstsource CEO Rajesh Subramaniam. Rajesh, you helped build Firstsource, and you reached a point where you managed to take it to IPO, big organization, and then you decided to take a break. Or maybe you took, you had the funds, I guess, to venture into this new space of being a venture capital. Talk us through that whole transition and what inspired you to get into this new space.
Yeah, if you recollect, I joined ICICI, and then ICICI OneSource coming in from the venture capital industry, and I left the venture capital industry because I didn't have the skill sets to help entrepreneurs. I had no operating experience. But the 7 years I spent with ICICI and Firstsource, building a company from a business plan to its successful IPO, which saw a demand of over $5 billion, and at our peak market cap was $1 billion, was a fulfillment of a very successful stint in creating a company. and rewarding shareholders. And fundamentally, I believe that I had armed myself with the experience where I could go back and work with entrepreneurs in the early stages of their evolution as a venture capitalist. And the love for being in the venture industry was because you get to meet so many people smarter than yourself. And in life, it's always about learning. You're always on a learning process, and the passion and the ideas and the problem-solving capabilities of an ecosystem of entrepreneurs. A lot of them would not make it, but you can't discourage them for the intent,
or lack of trying.
And that's when some of the mistakes they would likely to make. As I said in the early part, we made a lot of mistakes. So how do you then bring that experience to bear and then help differentiate between what I call smart money, which can help in the investment thesis of helping companies grow. So that's why I went back to the venture industry. I joined a Silicon Valley tier 1 VC called Walden International. Walden was actually the first Silicon Valley VC in India way back in '85. They and Draper Fisher Jewinson, they were the two early VCs in India. And I helped restart Walden again in 2008, and that's when I decided to move on and start working with the entrepreneurial ecosystem in India.
And then you got this call from Firstsource, right?
That's right.
This is the Steve Jobs second coming call, right? So what happened then? Talk us through that and some of the lessons you can learn from there.
Yeah, I fundamentally Firstsource. I was extremely passionate. I still am, extremely passionate about Firstsource. Having laid the early
you kept tabs on them.
Absolutely. I mean, I was so. Every time I go out, I present myself to an entrepreneur saying that I was one of the early founding members, and I was the CFO and head of strategy when I left Firstsource, and that gets you attention. The money becomes secondary. It's the experience becomes more important. But then with the founding team all going their own separate ways, the company started to flounder a little bit, and the company performance started deteriorating significantly. Plus, the shareholders wanted an exit. The company was over leveraged. There were all strappings of some trouble. In the company, and that's when the chairman and the vice chairman of the board, the vice chairman was the founding CEO. They reached out to me and asked me whether I could come back and help restructure the business and have the company sold and give shareholders an exit and take care of some of the operating issues in the company.
So this is interesting. You had an experience building, from a startup stage, building it and scaling it and growing it. And here's what typically happens to most companies. You come to a stage where you kind of stagnate or you kind of flatten out now. So you had an opportunity now to come back and take it to the next level. What were some key learnings? I mean, there are a lot of companies like that. Grow it and you got that exponential growth, and then you kind of stagnate, right? Yeah. What were key levels that you had to pull to take that to grow to the next level?
Absolutely. I think it, Firstsource case, it wasn't just stagnating, but it was a rapid deterioration.
Okay.
So the quality of earnings, the quality of relationship with customers, the organizational design, the structures, the governance. I mean, there was a complete breakdown.
And this was because of the magnitude of scale.
Yeah,
it was just not able to handle the.
Absolutely. So since there was a as I said, the founding leadership had left, so it was a new team. It was a fundamentally. And the ability to manage some of the complex businesses that we had created and we had managed was proving to be a little too much of a challenge, and the company completely went. At one stage, Firstsource was facing bankruptcy, would have been broken up into parts. Had a huge FCCB liability of 280 million plus.
Okay.
Had an overall debt profile of 420 million at that point in time.
So this was the scenario when you came in?
This is the scenario when I came in, and our market cap was down to as low as 55 million in January 2012.
From a billion?
From a billion.
Wow.
Okay. So that was... So for me, I came back and I said, it's a $400 million startup. We've got to, we have to be reborn again. And at that time, the principal actions that I took was to re-energize the team. It was to re-energize the assets of the company. Ours is a people-intensive business,
yeah.
and leadership is predicated on standing on the shoulders of very, very strong operators and help them deliver the results which would enable the turnaround.
And what were some things you did? I mean, practical things.
Practical thing was to first identify the problem.
Zoom in on the root cause.
Just zoom in on the root cause,
Yep.
and then clear all the obstacles that prevented us from getting to the problem. Then clear all the obstacles that would prevent us from solving the problem.
Okay.
By simplifying it, it had a lot of work that had to
but very focused and very structured and hitting at the right things. Yeah.
Absolutely, and the focus was, the engagement with customers was suffering. We had to revive that because customers, at the end of the day, if you don't innovate for customers, if you stay at the same point you were 5 years back, you become irrelevant. So the question is, again, go back to what are the customers' problems? How do you solve the customer problems? Because we had the relationships which were ignored. So we re-energized the whole customer framework. We then, elevated people that were buried in the organization because of hierarchies and bureaucracy, but they were the solid performers. We elevated them and cleaned out the structure to give them the ability to lead the organization forward. It was again people. People are the core assets.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people say that, but the actions sometimes belittle their...
No, it's people and people. And the beauty about human psychology is that they all want to solve problems.
Yes.
Somebody whose mind is idle and gets bored, it reflects in the mediocrity of the performance.
Absolutely, and the disengagement.
So solving problems, empowering people and getting them to, take decisions and take it boldly, because we needed bold decisions and I couldn't take all the decisions.
Sure.
It had to be... So choosing those 8-10 people,
the collective,
who could pull this company forward. I think the period between 2011 and 13 is when we effected the turnaround, and by 2016-17, we were back up to almost 800-900 million market cap, we turned on. Profitability improved 6-7 times, market cap improved 10-12 times. Today we're practically zero debt company.
So it's all these little but focused decisions or actions that you take.
Actions and again we made mistakes, but the thing is you
learn from them.
You learn from it and you move on. And the clear thing is to align people's interests. What happens is the conflicts which were emerging were more because of personalities and not because of solving a problem. And some of the HR interventions we had to do to turn that around was, once a call was taken, everybody rallied behind it and focused and got it done. So the first 2 years, we had to take some gut-wrenching decisions, but we had to do it because at the end of the day, we are responsible to the 150,000 shareholders who put in their money in the company.
Absolutely.
And when they've seen their wealth disappear from $1 billion to 55 million, I think it's a wake-up call for all of us to go and solve the problem.
Just another 1 or 2 minutes as we close this out, but a thing that always I struggle with BPOs and folks in your industry is the whole retention issue. And part of it is you have to constantly develop your employees, constantly give them challenges and so on. What do you guys do at Firstsource to drive retention down, in a sense that keeping the employees in your organization?
Absolutely. So I think attrition was a concern in the early days. Early days it was more because of the burnout rates, because it is a high stress and it's unnatural shifts. I mean, people are
especially
working
US hours,
US hours, Australian hours. I mean, they all come into the graveyard shift. So early days, those were the reasons of attrition. But getting out of the commodity segment, which makes it repetitive and monotonous, and then moving up the value chain, where again people's minds are activated in solving problems, is how. Have we cracked the code? No. Are we on that journey? Absolutely yes. Today it's no more how many people we employ, but the outcomes we drive. In 2012 we were 33,000 people. We were 450 million in revenues. Today we are 19,000 people.
So you halved it, yeah.
And we are 550 million in revenues. So the game is not about adding people. The game is about how do you leverage your human capital in delivering
and
superior
maximize
outcomes.
their potential also. And just to close this out, I mean, there's a lot of people who say, I want to be like Rajesh. I want to be a successful leader. I want to build a company. I want to go out there and be able to scale and grow, right? So if you look at young people just coming out of university or colleges and they're saying, hey, I want to be like Rajesh, what sort of advice would you give?
I think you need a lot of nervous energy around yourself. I mean, you want to solve big problems.
Okay.
You want to make an impact because you want to solve problems and you want to feel good about it. I mean, money, position, power, all those things will follow.
Yeah.
But the fundamental thing is to identify problems and solve them effectively. That makes a deep impact. I think that's what all of us wake up to early in the morning when we get to work. That we want to solve problems and get ahead in life.
So we should keep ourselves, attuned to opportunities and problems out there, and constantly look for ways to solve this, and then automatically all the wealth and all
that. And surround yourself with people smarter than you. Surround yourself with people smarter than you, because if you have people who are not smarter than you, then you become the bottleneck, because they expect you to tell them.
Very good. We've been speaking to Rajesh Subramaniam, CEO of
who
Firstsource.
know what to do, and they just come to you to say that I'm going to do it in these 3 ways. Which way do you think sounds better to you? Is a much better way to work than being telling people what needs to happen, because at that point in time the company is only as good as you are. And you become the bottleneck. Surround yourself with people smarter than you is an advice given to me in my early working days, and that's advice I'll give people who are looking to set out on the journey of entrepreneurship at this point in time.
Rajesh, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you.
Likewise, thank you very much. Thanks.
We've been speaking to Rajesh Subramaniam, CEO of Firstsource.